Caminamos en la tierra, la comida produce en la tierra, el agua sale de la tierra, el bosque da el aire al mundo. ¿Por qué no fijan eso? Mi nombre es Nemonte Nequimo, soy mujer waurani. Vivimos aquí en la selva Nemonte. Tenemos que nosotros mostrar al gobierno, al mundo, que nuestro territorio existe lleno de vida. El mapa del gobierno solo ve un lineamiento y recursos que quieren aprovechar. Para nosotros, pueblo guaraní, no existe el bloque 22. El petróleo tiene que quedar debajo de nuestra casa, no hay que extraer. Hemos visto nuestro propio ojo, el petrolero trae solamente la enfermedad y la muerte. Con mucho coraje, con mucha fuerza, con mucha rabia, empecé a luchar. No está en venta. El gobierno no tiene que pisar encima y no tiene que matar a nosotros, ¿no? Sin agua, sin el aire, todos moriremos. Que yo tengo una hija hermosa, 4 años. Pensé que ella va a tener la selva como ahora tengo. Y ahora, como nunca vamos a unir todos los indígenas para proteger y luchar para nuestros hijos y para vuestros hijos que viven en el mundo.
Hello and welcome to the event, the listening event that's going to be highlighting the beautiful voice of Nemonte Nequimo. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm Days, I'm not Alice. Alice is off poorly today, so I'll be taking over. I'm a climate justice activist and a director at Earthrise Studios. So I'm going to be joined today by Ian, and he's going to basically do a little introduction. He's the regional head of sustainability at Meta.
Super, thanks Days. Thank you Nemonte, and thanks to everyone for joining us here today. We're absolutely thrilled to be able to host this listening session today. And I think this is the very first climate session we've had in person for about 2 years, or certainly since COVID, so I'm even more thrilled to have everyone here. My name is Eoghan Griffin, I'm the Head of Sustainability for Europe at Meta, and I won't talk for long tonight, that definitely doesn't feel like the point, but I did want to take this opportunity to just put some of tonight's conversation in the context of Meta's own sustainability and climate strategy. We've been working on these issues for over 10 years, and we have a robust sustainability strategy in place, which includes a science-based target to be net zero by 2030. And we've already reduced our Scope 1 and 2 emissions by 94%, largely through the support of renewable energy, which has been one of our major success stories. We also have a water goal to become water positive by 2030, and this will mean we'll be restoring more water than we use as a company. And it will see us expand our water restoration projects, which are mostly in the US, and bringing them to Europe, which I'm personally particularly excited about. We invest in high quality, verified carbon offset projects, and while we recognise that tree planting won't just save the planet, we do know that scaling nature-based solutions and protecting and supporting the forests we have is critically important, and there's so much more we can learn from Nemonte, from Indigenous communities and organisations like Amazon Frontlines. But that's really just the start of it for us. We recognise the enormous potential of our platforms to be a force for good in the fight against climate change, and we're ramping up our work in this space, developing climate and sustainability partnerships with nonprofits, supporting climate creators to create engaging content, and creating sustainability features across our different platforms, such as the Climate Science Centre and the Facebook app. So I'm going to stop there. I'll be hanging around for a bit afterwards if anyone has any questions or would like to chat further, and I'll hand back over to you, Dave.
Thank you. So welcome to the listening session. For those who may have not been to a listening session before, in essence, what will happen is we've going to be joined by a beautiful speaker today who's going to speak around 30 to 40 minutes. She will also be accompanied by lovely Alex, who's her translator, and will translate everything you need to hear today. But then we've got 4 listeners, and as you can see, there are 3 empty seats here, and these seats are people who hold influence in their sectors, and they will be hearing and listening today, but then also we as the audience are here to witness them listening and to make sure that they're held accountable to everything that they should be hearing today. So we're going to be inviting our next 3 listeners who are going to come through the magical doors soon. I can see one peeking through. Chloe, could you give a prompt? Perfect. Can we get a nice, gentle round of applause for our awesome speakers? So over here we've got Prabhu. Yes, I love getting a name right. And she is the head of Wealth Advisory Services and Family Governance Services at JP Morgan. We've got Cara Delevingne, a model, actress, and trustee of Eco Resolutions. And we're also joined by Deborah Frances-White, a comedian, or author, and a screenwriter who co-hosts and creates the Guilty Feminist podcast. I know, right? It's pretty stellar. So now we're actually going to introduce our amazing speaker. She is one of the most amazing Indigenous leaders of our time. She's from the Waorani people in the Ecuadorian Amazon, and she's going to be joining us here to share her wisdom. She's been leading her community fighting against big oil since before she was even probably able to speak. And she has won even though she is, she's facing the giants of the big oil business. She has also been recognized broadly by people like the Goldman Sachs Award, by the Time 100, and she is also one of the BBC's 100 Women in 2020. Can we please have a really warm welcome for Nemonte Nequimo? Hello. And then the floor's yours.
Me merina ni ke ai mai 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 me nyerina ni ke ai mai me nyerina ni ke ai mai me Mi nombre es Nemonte Nequimo. Soy mujer Waorani y líder en el Ecuador.
Hello, my name is Nemonte Nequimo. I am a Waorani woman and leader from Ecuador.
Primeramente, nuestros cultura, nuestros ancestros, antes de expresar donde visitamos o donde recibimos en la casa, iniciamos con el canto.
In my culture, before we meet with people, when we arrive at someone's home, we sing.
La música que yo canté es muy antigua, de miles de años. Nuestro canto era nuestras abuelas, nuestros abuelos defendían la selva, protegían la selva, tenían mucho amor y respetaban y vivían conectados. Y ahora esa energía, esa lucha traigo desde muy lejos, pero estamos conectados con la tierra.
And what this song is about, it's thousands of years old, passed down from generation to generation. And it's about how our people have always defended the rainforest. We've always protected our territory because we have love for our territory. And we've always cared for it because of that love.
Mi gente, Waorani, hace 60 años que civilizaron contacto al mundo.
My people are the most recently contacted indigenous group in Ecuador. We were contacted 60 years ago.
Mi gente somos historiadores. Mi gente somos cantores, mi gente somos chistosos, mi gente es muy divertida, no son callados, mi gente, porque ellos tienen una cultura viva, tienen una selva viva que nos da espíritu, que nos fortalece para estar en armonía.
My people are storytellers, we are singers, we are very funny people, we like to have fun, we're not quiet. We are a living culture and we live within a healthy and living forest.
Vivimos colectivamente.
We live collectively, together.
Y eso yo vengo darle una historia, antes de nada de otros que he venido luchando, quiero como introducir de dónde soy, de dónde vengo.
And I'd like to start tonight by telling you a little bit where I'm from.
Porque en mi cultura somos colectivos.
Because in my culture, we share, we are collective.
Durante ese largo proceso, civilización evangélica ha traído una enfermedad a mi gente. Murieron muchos, mis tíos, mis abuelos murieron, primer contacto, murieron de polio, de sarampión y otras enfermedades.
When my people were first contacted by evangelical missionaries, they brought with them diseases that we'd never experienced before, measles, smallpox, and my ancestors, many of them died from this sickness.
Y mi territorio es grande, es 3 provincias, Pastaza, Napo, Orellana.
Our territory is vast, and it covers what today in Ecuador are 3 provinces, Napo, Pastaza, and Orellana.
Donde yo vengo todavía tengo 180,000 hectáreas, es un territorio sano, libre, sin extracción de petrolera, sin invasión, sin carretera.
And where I'm from, in Pastaza province, is a vast territory of 180,000 hectares, and it's a healthy territory, free from oil, free from development, free from roads.
Y de lo que justo en la civilización, justo con los evangélicos misioneros americanos de los Estados Unidos, llegaron justo también petroleras en la Amazonía del Ecuador.
And with the missionaries who came to civilize us, who came from the United States, in their footsteps came the oil companies.
Y eso, entrada de petrolera, se ha perjudicado nuestra cultura donde vive mi gente. Ahora petrolera está operando, está destruyendo, está contaminando, no solamente impactos, daños ambientales, sino cultura, la vivencia, nuestra creencia. Eso ha sido mi crecimiento de niña, he visto. Y de esos sufrimientos que sufrimos como pueblos indígenas.
And with oil came new threats to our territory and our way of life. Both environmental threats and cultural threats. I've seen the damages to not only our lands, but also our way of life, how we live, our language, our songs, our livelihoods. And I've seen how people suffer when the oil companies come.
Y también he visto a otros pueblos que primer contacto que hizo petrolera dijo que si entra petrolera va a ayudar, educación, salud, bien bonito, pero en realidad la situación que viven los pueblos indígenas que viven norte en el Ecuador solamente tienen el agua, contaminación y la enfermedad y la muerte.
And I've seen the impacts of oil on neighboring indigenous communities and neighboring indigenous nations. I've seen how the oil companies and the government say that with oil there will be development, there will be education, healthcare. But all I've seen that oil brings to indigenous peoples is sickness, is death, is contamination.
Para mí como mujer indígena guaraní siento coraje de ver eso porque donde yo vivo, también el gobierno ecuatoriano intentó vender ese bloque 22 sin consultar a nosotros, sin reunir nosotros, solo en Quito, reuniendo con los ministerios, reuniendo con los otros países grandes industriales, diciendo que hay bloque 22, donde nosotros estamos viviendo comunidad guaraní de Pastaza, 22 comunidades.
And it made me very, very angry to learn that the government had plans to sell off our land to oil companies without ever consulting with us. Only meeting in Quito, in the capital city, with other countries, with foreign investors, and with companies, they made plans to sell off our land in what is called Oil Block 22.
Y ahí como yo, mujer, como ya estaba trabajando junto con otras nacionalidades, trabajando solución, sistema de agua de lluvia, y nosotros con los pueblos que primer contacto con petroleros viven, unimos para intercambiar. Yo a mi gente llevaba para que miren lo que ha hecho, causa daño petróleo, y donde nosotros vivimos, cómo vivimos, armonía, feliz, compartiendo, ayudando uno a otro. Y eso era la unión que nos dio fuerza para ganar contra el gobierno ecuatoriano.
And as a woman leader at that time, I was working with other indigenous nations, building our own solutions to oil contamination through clean water systems. And at that time, we were organizing exchanges between our peoples, between communities that had lived with oil extraction for decades, and communities like mine that were free from oil, so that we could learn from one another, so that we could show those communities what there is to protect, what life in a healthy forest can look like. And so that people from my community and the 22 other communities affected or to be affected by Oil Block 22 could understand what was at stake.
Yo como mujer, yo veía a mi padre y a mi cultura desde niña viendo, desde iglesia misma hacía tener miedo. Su creencia es pecado, nuestra creencia iglesia es salva. Y conversé con mi papá y me dijo mi papá, sin conocer al mundo, sin saber de iglesia, vivimos bien, sano en el territorio. Cuando llegó los contactos, el mundo occidental causó enfermedad, llegó división, llegó alcohol, llegó dinero, llegó política. Eso trae destrucción, dijo mi papá.
I would talk to my father, who was born before contact with Western society. And he told me how, with the arrival of the missionaries and the church to our territory, our people were taught to be afraid of our own way of life and our own culture. My dad would also tell me how before the missionaries, before contact, we lived well in this territory. We were healthy. We lived in a safe and healthy forest. But with Western society came sickness, came division between families, came alcoholism, greed and money, and many, many problems.
Y ahí yo como mujer di cuenta y formé una alianza Seibo, fundé, porque yo di cuenta que era peligro donde venía desde el gobierno, desde otras organizaciones políticas, iban invadiendo, negociando, ofreciendo dinero, buena calidad de vida, pero eran líderes hombres y se iban manipulando, y sentí y miraba con otros pueblos. Yo como mujer tenía mucho miedo. Donde yo vivo, comunidad guaraní de Pastaza, 180,000 hectáreas. Si no ponemos a unir, a hacer trabajo, va a pasar lo mismo, historia como pasó a otra nacionalidad. Ahí empecé a encabezar, luchar, trabajar. No solamente luchar, sino dando soluciones con los jóvenes en el territorio.
As a woman leader, because I was greatly concerned about the threats to my people's land and neighboring indigenous territories, I worked with other leaders to form our own organization, which is called Seibo Alliance. It's an alliance between 4 indigenous nations, the first of its kind in Ecuador. And so that we could work together to come up with solutions to the mounting threats against our lands and ways of life. We saw how the governments and the companies were invading indigenous territories. We saw how corrupt male leaders were negotiating with these invaders and with the companies. And I was really afraid that we would lose everything that was good about our territory and our land and way of life. And so I recognized that we needed to unite so that we could be stronger in the face of these threats. Otherwise, what would happen in my territory, I saw that my territory had experienced the same thing that had happened in other indigenous territories that had been experiencing extraction for decades. So I began to lead, I began to organize, and I began to fight.
Y yo di cuenta que la unión era más importante, porque nosotros, pueblos indígenas, somos muy pequeños grupos, como 5%, pero la diversidad de Amazonía es 80% que hemos cuidado por miles de años. Empecé a organizar, empecé a encabezar, di cuenta, y mientras el gobierno en 2018 ya estaba declarando
poniendo ofertas a diferentes países, pronunciando que hay bloque 22, donde no existe, es selva verde, no es como mirada del gobierno vio solo recursos, que había petróleo debajo de la tierra. Pero como nosotros, pueblos indígenas, vemos, no es verde, para nosotros es lleno de vida, como ustedes ven igual al mercado, como farmacia, ferretería, es lo mismo nuestra selva. Nuestra selva tenemos conexión, sabemos dónde hay las plantas medicinales, dónde es lugares sagrados, dónde producen los pescados, dónde producen los animales. Eso no tienen entendimiento.
And I recognized, along with other leaders, that unity was the most important thing. Because we're small. As indigenous peoples, minority nations in this part of Ecuador, we're maybe less than 5% of the population, but we protect over 80% of the biodiversity. And so we began to organize, and I began to lead. In 2018, the government was promoting an oil auction where they wanted to auction off our lands to oil companies. They were negotiating with foreign investors and companies. And they talked about how our forest was open. It was open for the taking. It was just a forest, and it was an area full of resources. But for us, that's not the case. Our forest is full of life. For us, our forest is how you all live in the cities. There we have our pharmacy, we have our hardware store, we have our supermarket, and we have a deep, deep connection to the land. We have a connection to the plants, to the animals, to the sacred sites. That is what our forest is to us.
Y de ahí cuando escuchamos, justo como nosotros ya teníamos mapa hecho, trabajando con las mujeres, con los jóvenes, y cuando el gobierno pronunció, nosotros hicimos rápido reunión y decidir toma de decisiones colectivamente, y otras nacionalidades dijeron, Nemo, ustedes son Guarani 4,000, ¿cómo van a ganar contra el gobierno que tiene poder, que tiene muy fuerte economía mirada al mundo? Y yo le dije, no me importa, a mí me importa, el gobierno debe respetar al derecho de la naturaleza, del derecho de los pueblos indígenas. Y nuestra selva es todo, nuestra casa. Vamos a ir a empujar, no importa. Y de ahí empezamos a unir con las mujeres, con jóvenes, con abuelos, salimos. Y eso demanda juntos, colectivamente lo hicimos. Fallo histórico. Ese fallo histórico no significó para el pueblo guaraní, sino para toda la Amazonía del Ecuador y también los demás países.
So we began to organize, and we decided we needed to make a map of our territory that could offer a counter narrative to the story the government was telling about our territory. So we organized women, youth, and elders to walk in the forest and to collect data so that we could present our own map of our territory. The government was announcing the auction of our lands, and we made a decision collectively to say no resource extraction in our territory, no oil in our lands. Other people told me, Nemonte, Waurani, you're only 4,000 people. You're a small group. How are you ever going to beat the government that has endless resources? How are you going to go up against big oil that has so much power? And I told them, that doesn't matter to me. I'm not afraid, because the government has to respect our rights. It has to respect the rights of nature. Our forest is our home, and we're not going to give up. And so we began to unite with women, elders, and youth to go out in the streets to protest. And we filed a lawsuit against the Ecuadorian government, and we won. In 2019, we beat the government in court. And this victory isn't just a victory for my people. It protects a large part of our territory, but it also establishes an important legal precedent that can be used by other indigenous peoples across Ecuador.
Y yo voy a dar un poco concretas, muy fuerte, como mi punto de vista como mujer. Yo como mujer viviendo de selva, escucho mucho cambio climático. El mundo de aquí occidental ahora recién está dando cuenta, preocupan. Pero nosotros como pueblos indígenas, hace miles de años teníamos esa sabiduría, ese conocimiento. Sabíamos que el peligro llega a riesgo en el futuro generación. Hemos respetado. La Madre Tierra no espera que salvemos. La Madre Tierra espera que respetemos. Y esos pueblos indígenas en general, no en el Ecuador, en todo el país, hemos respetado. Pero lo que pasa en el mundo occidental, el capitalismo, las industrias, está construido encima del sufrimiento de la tierra, está construido encima del sufrimiento de los pueblos indígenas.
My point of view, I'm going to share my point of view as an Indigenous woman. I'm hearing a lot of talk these days about climate change. And I think that in the West, people are just starting to realize the significance of climate change. This is something Indigenous peoples we have known for thousands of years. We know that if you harm your environment, you're creating danger for future generations, which is why we've always respected our lands. We know that Mother Earth doesn't expect to be saved. Mother Earth expects to be respected. And Indigenous peoples across the world, not just in Ecuador, not just in the Amazon, across the entire world, we have respected Mother Earth for generations. I'm seeing as well how industrial societies, Western societies, are built on the destruction of the earth. They're built on the destruction of Indigenous peoples.
Y para mí, directo lanzar una respuesta es ya no más reuniones de cambio climático como político, porque yo vengo mujer de selva, no ha habido ninguna solución, ni política, ni dinero. La solución ha sido nosotros como pueblos indígenas que estamos viviendo a miles de años. Pero la detención de cambio climático tienen que sacrificar la gente, Europa, Estados Unidos, que viven ese sistema. Porque mucho estamos hablando de futuras generaciones, pero la única manera que tienen que ustedes como gente, la responsabilidad, no más invertir en empresas que destruyen la tierra, que contamina el aire, que contamina el agua. Eso estoy viendo como mujer directo. Y ya no más esperemos que el pueblo indígena en la planeta estén al frente luchando, hablando de la vida. Nosotros estamos pidiendo, póngase a nuestro lado con coraje de invertir, de salvar a la planeta, a la selva para futuras generaciones.
I'm tired of all the meetings. I'm tired of all these talks about climate change, politicians talking and doing nothing. I'm tired of talks about investing in Indigenous peoples, but the money never reaches our communities. We Indigenous peoples, our way of life and our fight is the solution. But it can't just be us on the front lines risking our lives alone all the time. I call upon you, people of Western societies, of Europe and the US, to sacrifice, to make a sacrifice. This system that you're a part of is what's destroying our planet, and it's going to take your support to change it. We have to think about future generations. So I ask you, stop investing in fossil fuels, stop investing in the industries that destroy our planet, that contaminate our water and our air. I'm seeing, as an Indigenous woman, how there seems to be this expectation that Indigenous peoples are going to somehow save the planet on our own. And it can't just be us fighting on the front lines, risking our lives alone. So I'm asking you to take a stand, to join us.
Y último mensaje para los madres especialmente, como mujer siento, eduquen a sus hijos de proteger planeta. Eduquen a sus hijos de no ensuciar más. Eduquen a sus hijos que no vuelvan a consumir, que se causa en el planeta. Y eduquen a sus hijos que toquen a la tierra, que respiren el espacio caminando, no un mundo muy moderno, que eso es como enfermo, y eso me preocupa mucho, porque yo me preocupa de lo que afecta, claro, para dar buena riqueza, comunidad, afecta como mujer indígena, afecta a mi hijo, pero afecta en todo el planeta. Eso me preocupa en futuras generaciones. Y eso doy mensaje. Si yo quiero hablar más del trabajo lucha, podría ser horas o hasta amanecer. Tengo mucho, solo tengo claros, precisos dejar. Y mi mensaje, espero que visibilicen, espero que pongan carajo y de ponerse al lado, trabajar junto con nosotros, no solamente hablando de los países, solamente en el mar, como dice nuestro presidente, hay que reforestar Galápagos, pero no habla en la Amazonía. Eso me duele a mí porque yo vengo de Amazonía, el aire, el oxígeno y el carbono, 80% que está dando vida a nosotros, tenemos que proteger, tenemos que hacer nosotros, que estamos escuchando aquí, tenemos solución, no el gobierno, no capitalismo va a solucionar. Esa es mi respuesta y muchísimas gracias.
And I'd like to finish here tonight with a message to all the mothers in the room. Educate your children. Teach your children to care for and protect the planet and nature. Teach them not to pollute. Teach them to consume less. Teach them to touch the earth, to create a real connection with Mother Nature. Teach them to walk in nature, because it's this disconnection from our planet that's causing all of this sickness. Your actions in Western society and industrialized nations affect us. They affect me. They affect my children. But they also affect you. They affect the entire planet. I could stand here talking for hours about what needs to happen. But I'd like to wrap up by saying, stand with Indigenous peoples. Help make our efforts and our struggles visible. Visibilize our fight. I'm tired of just hearing talks about saving the oceans. The oceans are important. Right now, the Ecuadorian government seems to use the Galapagos Islands as a bit of a smokescreen. But the Amazon is where so much of the Earth's carbon is. It's where so much of the Earth's oxygen is produced. And we, Indigenous peoples, joining together with everyone, we, the people across the world, we're the solution. The governments aren't the solution. The politicians aren't the solution. Capitalism is not the solution. It is us together. And that is my message. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Nemonte, for sharing. Thank you so much. It was really beautiful to listen to. And thank you so much, Alex, for translating as well and keeping us going. So the next section of this session is actually where we're going to invite the listeners to ask one question to Nemonte. And it looks like Cara has been chosen to be the first one to go.
The girl, oh, sorry, you picked the girl who's crying. Sorry, a little bit. Thank you so much. Sorry guys, why did you pick me first? That's mean. If all of us up here could do one thing each, especially, I don't know, for me personally as well, with the platform or anyone in this room, what would be the first 3 things that we could do?
La pregunta es, primeramente dijo, escogieron la mujer que está aquí llorando, ¿por qué a mí me escogieron? Dice, si nosotros aquí, los que estamos aquí escuchando, pudiésemos hacer una cosa cada uno, yo, por ejemplo, que tengo una gran plataforma, muchos seguidores, ¿qué son 3 cosas que nosotros aquí podríamos hacer?
Yo tengo respuesta a eso. Visibilizar el trabajo de la Amazonía, y también muy pronto vamos a pedir la petición que estamos haciendo en Corte Constitucional en el Ecuador, que se elimina el decreto que está amenazando contra los pueblos indígenas, y eso necesitamos todo el mundo que nos firmen en nuestra página para que no vea el gobierno solo los indígenas está, sino todo en el mundo por la vida está una sola causa. Eso sería un gran apoyo también. Y también sería bueno decirle que muchas de las veces sentimos como líder, he visto de mi experiencia en el trabajo, hay muchos recursos que dan financiamiento a las organizaciones grandes, donde el gobierno, donde el ministerio no hace nada. Es igual, no hay solución. Mejor es invertir en las organizaciones básicas que están viviendo colectivamente, que están realmente en lucha al frente. Ese es un apoyo.
So, I have an answer. For those of you who have a platform, share about our fight. Bring visibility to our struggle as Indigenous peoples. Right now, we have a petition going out. And so I ask all of you out there to please add your name to this petition. Ecuadorian government, President Guillermo Lasso recently issued 2 decrees to double oil production in Ecuador, massively expand mining. Most of these concessions are in indigenous territories. So we need people to add their voice to our message, no resource extraction in our lands. We need the whole world to add their voice. Another thing is that as a leader, as a woman leader, I see how resources, funding goes to big organizations across the world. It goes to government ministries, but that money never reaches frontline communities. It never reaches people who are actually fighting and risking their lives to protect nature, to protect our ways of life. And so I ask you to also invest in frontlines organizations, invest in communities, invest in small organizations that are taking a stand and fighting to protect our planet.
Thank you. And next I'll invite Deborah to ask her question.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing this with us. And I just firstly want to say I'm sorry for my obvious part in this. You talked about sacrifice and that we need to sacrifice. And I think it's one of the hardest things for human beings to do. Like, we think if we've already got something, if it's being taken away, like we're owed it. And linked to that, you talked about it's not, governments aren't going to do anything. They're not going to change anything. But you took your government to court and you won and you set a precedent. So should we be running workshops with ourselves about sacrifice, with each other on sacrifice? Should sacrifice be the theme, and should we be trying to take our governments to court or hold them to account? That seems like a two-part question, but I feel like it's so linked. Should we be making our governments make sacrifices too?
Ya te digo. Dijo, muchas gracias por venir, por compartir tu mensaje, y también, pues, primeramente quiero decir, lo siento, porque yo también soy parte de este sistema. Tú has hablado del sacrificio que tenemos que hacer en las sociedades occidentales, y yo reconozco que es una de las cosas más difíciles de hacer, porque la gente siente que se nos está quitando algo. Y tú también has dicho que en tu lucha reconociste que el gobierno no va a actuar. Y por eso ustedes llevaron juicio contra el gobierno y ganaron. Entonces mi pregunta es como dos partes. Uno, en las sociedades industriales debemos estar organizando talleres donde podemos hablar de qué es lo que podemos sacrificar y cómo sacrificar. Debemos hacer eso. Y segundo, debemos estar llevando juicios contra nuestros gobiernos también para asegurar que haya responsabilidad.
Yo creo que en garantizar en las leyes que se puede cumplir, porque hay muchos en garantizar de los derechos de la naturaleza y de derechos de los pueblos indígenas activistas hay, pero no hay impulso que se da y acción. Esa es preocupación. Desde aquí es muy bueno que pueden construir fuerte, que se respeta esa toma de decisiones también.
So regarding the second part of your question, she thinks, Nemonte says it's really, really important to hold governments to account. There are a lot of laws out there, good laws that exist, but are not actually applied in practice. So it's important to apply pressure to decision makers and to governments to respect rights, respect indigenous rights, respect the rights of nature. Without that impulse, it's easy for governments to pretend those rights don't exist. So it is really important to hold governments to account, take them to court, make them hear your voices. Y sobre la primera pregunta de talleres como las cuales pueden hablar sobre el sacrificio, buscar soluciones.
Yo creo que esa parte es muy sencilla porque, no sé, de mi punto de vista es como yo siento, es la responsabilidad de proteger en la Amazonía, porque ese sistema es una amenaza directa a los pueblos indígenas y directo a los pueblos derechos de la naturaleza. También eso causa en global, que afecta a nuestro mundo, y por eso es muy necesario, es no como taller. Creo que eso ustedes tienen esa conciencia, sienten ese corazón. Simplemente les digo que tomen esa fuerza de visibilizar el trabajo, como no más invertir las cosas, sino buenas cosas, construir otra manera de sistema. Es posible, porque la gente sí podemos llegar, porque yo enfrentando con el gobierno siento como Guaraní Pueblo 4000, no significa nada, pero ganamos y estamos ahí y estamos nosotros mismos construyendo, en decirle que la decisión y consulta, esa manera tiene que hacer, no del gobierno, y eso estamos nosotros de pie, no rindiéndose, estamos con la fuerza y con la esperanza, con otros pueblos y también con leyes que se puede garantizar.
Regarding the question around workshops, I feel like it's actually really quite simple. People need to feel responsibility. They need to understand that your actions here, what you consume and the way you live, threatens indigenous peoples, it threatens nature, and it threatens the entire planet. It threatens your future generations, your children. I don't know that workshops are necessary. I believe that the consciousness already exists. I think people know that the way that they're living is creating this harm. And so people need to put that into action. Stop investing in companies that destroy nature. Another system, think about solutions, think about another system. In fact, another system is possible, it already exists. You just have to dig deep to figure out how you can create it and how you can create that change. It's possible. Let me tell you it's possible. We as Waorani were only 4,000 people. We were told we would never defeat the government, but we did. We won. And we did that by collectively building something, by telling the government what they had to do, by demanding that they respect our rights. That's my answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Maya.
Thank you, Nemonte, for your very inspiring and also very humbling words. And I can only say how much courage you give us from your own example. I was very interested in what you said around women leaders. And there was something special about joining together with other women. And I wondered what we could learn from how you did that. I see many women in the room that we can bring to our lives and bring to your movement by joining together.
Primeramente, muchas gracias, Nemonte, por tu mensaje tan potente, inspirador y que también provoca humildad. Nos da mucha valentía tu ejemplo, ¿no? Y me impactó mucho lo que has dicho sobre el papel de las mujeres, del liderazgo de mujeres. Y mi pregunta es, ¿qué nosotros aquí, mujeres, podemos aprender de ti, de tu experiencia, de cómo unir con otras mujeres?
Yo creo que es muy importante este tema. Primeramente, en mi cultura antigua, la toma de decisión y paz eran mujeres, no hombres. Y eso tengo orgullo de eso. Y también trabajando con las mujeres, yo he sentido con mucha confianza, con mucho valor, con mucho coraje. Hemos hecho algo. Y también yo pienso que no es importante solamente pueblos indígenas, también en todos los espacios en trabajo sería muy bueno que le den oportunidad de que ejercen las mujeres. No eso significa que el pensamiento de mujeres, de hombre ya destruye, sino es como un pilar a mano construir y sería súper mejor al mundo, sería lograr de hacer éxito. Yo tengo mucha esperanza en las mujeres.
That's a very great question. Thanks for asking. In my culture, traditionally, women are the decision makers. We are the ones who decide over the future within our communities, over the future for our children. And for me, it's always given me great courage, great hope, and a real sense of shared value working with other women, working with Indigenous women, coming together. And not just with Indigenous women, but working with women in all spaces. This is really, really important that we join together and that we uplift women's leadership. And that doesn't mean that we're taking away men's leadership, that we're destroying men's leadership. But I think it's important that women have an equal opportunity to lead and to make decisions. And this is really what gives me hope for the future, is the role that women can and will play.
And now Owen.
Super, thank you again, Nemonte, and it's always hard to go last when people have asked such great questions. But I think for me, I was quite struck about the connection you made between health and change in your community when the missionaries came in and the advent of disease, and it got me thinking, even here in London, how certain qualities of environment have deteriorated over time, particularly with air pollution, which we know kills thousands even in London every year. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you've witnessed, or your elders have witnessed, the climate change and maybe biodiversity loss, species loss, the impact on agriculture. I'd just love to hear a little bit more about how your community's kind of been impacted and maybe some of the ways you're building resilience within the community against those changes.
Tú contaste mucho sobre el vínculo y los impactos en salud y los cambios que provocaron la llegada de los misioneros y después también como los petroleros. Y aquí en Londres, en Reino Unido, también vemos cómo ha habido un deterioro del medio ambiente, de contaminación del aire. Y me gustaría que nos pudieses contar un poco más sobre lo que los mayores guaraníes vieron, han vivido en cuanto a cambios, ¿no?, en el medio ambiente, cambios al clima, pérdida de especies de animales y los impactos que ustedes han vivido. Si nos puedes contar un poco más de eso y también sobre cómo ustedes lo han enfrentado.
Bueno, esa parte, mi papá más que todo, mi papá es una de las personas que creció en la selva antes de contacto, desde niño hasta 11 años fue el primer contacto. Y mi papá me dice, ellos en la selva sin contacto del mundo no había enfermedad, no había muerte. Lo único había enfrentación entre ellos o caída de árbol y descuido que mordía, culebra venenosa, morían. Nunca enfermaban, nunca tenían tos, nunca tenían fiebre, nunca vieron. En la llegada de los evangélicos, ahí fue primer síntoma, pollo y sarampión, que murieron al día, guaraní, como 100 al día murieron. Eso mi papá dice que este fue un cambio y también viviendo ese largo tiempo, donde creció mi papá, es Orellana, donde está empresa petrolera, ahí dijo, hija, ese río era millones de especies de pescado, ahora ha habido muchos derrames, mira, solo ves agua, no hay pescado. Y eso mi papá dijo, cambio climático, impacto, entrada de petrolera, mi papá ve el cambio, es el agua, no, el peces no está y los animales tampoco se huyen, no están cerca. Y también a la gente mismo cambia, no tiene esa misma conexión y cambia en otra mentalidad. Eso es cambio climático, impacta a las sociedades de las comunidades en territorio, dice mi padre.
So my father has talked a lot about this because he was born before contact with the outside world. Missionaries arrived when my father was 11 years old. And he tells me stories about how life used to be before that contact. And he says that the territories were really healthy. There actually really wasn't any sickness. There was no cancer, no real diseases. People would die in battles. Maybe they would fall from a tree or they'd be bitten by a poisonous snake, but they weren't dying from diseases. It was when the missionaries came that the diseases followed. Polio, measles. And my dad talks about how there was a time when 100 people a day were dying from these sicknesses, and how he saw a great change come with that contact. My father is from Orellana province, which is north from where I was born, and where today there's oil extraction happening in the Yasuni area, one of the most biodiverse places on earth. My dad would tell me how when he was a kid growing up there, you could look at the river and see millions of different kinds of fish. And today you look and you don't see any. He talks about how he's feeling the climate changing, how he's seeing that there aren't as many fish as there used to be when he goes out on the river to fish, how the animals that they used to hunt easily are no longer close by. They've fled deeper and deeper into the forest. And he talks about the changes in the people too, how they're losing their own connection to the forest. All of this are some of the changes that he's experienced and that he tells me about over the last years. Y la otra pregunta era como si nos puedes contar un poco más sobre cómo ustedes están enfrentando esos cambios, poniéndose resilientes.
Este cambio para mí es una amenaza grande día a día, es la entrada de petrolera, la entrada de carretera, la entrada de minería o deforestación de madera ilegales, es como podría hacer cambio. Por eso mismo nosotros como pueblos indígenas más que nunca estamos uniendo y resistiendo y no queremos decir no, como resistir, y por eso mismo estamos como constituyendo las leyes para que el gobierno garantice y que respeta, porque muchas de las veces yo siento que sí hay ley escrita por derecho, pero encima de eso quiere violar el gobierno para sacar recursos, y eso es nuestra preocupación. Y yo estoy seguro que los pueblos indígenas estamos ahí, no estamos de ninguna manera saliendo, desafiando o desanimando, como ustedes sienten acá cómodo en la casa, es lo mismo, es nuestra selva, es todo nuestra casa.
And so, in response to your question about what we're doing, how we're confronting these changes, the greatest causes of climate change and harm to our territories that I'm seeing come from oil extraction, the construction of roads into our territories, mining, and logging. That's what's producing climate change, or at least that's producing the change that we are feeling where we live. And so we're joining together, we're uniting between Indigenous peoples and looking for support from people around the world to resist. And we are also using the laws to demand respect. We have rights. There are legal frameworks that guarantee our rights, but the governments and the companies violate our rights all the time. And this is what we are concerned about. But we're not giving up. In the way that you would do anything to defend the comfort of your home, we are defending our home. And so we are not going to give up.
On that note, hasn't this been such a rich conversation? And thank you so much for sharing with your whole heart. I think one part that particularly stuck with me was when you said, nature isn't waiting for us to save her, she's waiting for us to respect her. And I think that's something that we all should be taking away with us today. Thank you so much, listeners, for listening. Thank you so much, audience, for witnesses. And thank you so much, Nemonte, for sharing. And that's the end of the event. I hope that you guys follow all of the organizations who have been amazingly working hard in organizing this event. But then also, if you want to support a lot of Nemonte and other Indigenous leaders, please find out more at Amazon Frontline. Thank you.